I like to think of coercive control as a pattern of behaviour that ends up getting utilised by somebody in order to instill fear and introduce an imbalance of power and control. Coercive control I tend to think of as a tool of abuse, much the same as like physical violence, for instance. There's obviously a concern that they may end up needing to go to police to get any sorts of assistance, or to apply for payments such as like the Victims Assist Queensland payment. There's concerns that they may have to go to court in order to access safety planning as well. There's those concerns that you would need to disclose so many aspects of yourself and be quite vulnerable with a practitioner, as well as the concern that you're going to be talking to people that aren't part of the community or aren't aware of the community. Those barriers are very understandable for someone who's vulnerable and looking for support. We're here to kind of bridge those gaps and let people know that that's not the case. I'd love people to know that members of our community are everywhere in these organisations. There are a lot of steps that are being taken, even within religious organisations. Being able to have those conversations with a practitioner who's understanding where you're coming from can help navigate those more tricky situations that may have previously felt too difficult to kind of approach or inaccessible. There are so many avenues that you can go down when you're looking at putting together your safety plan. And any organisation that's worth its salt is going to be centering you and your expertise in the situation that you have frankly been doing a fantastic job of surviving. Navigating situations when maybe we don't want to talk to police, maybe we don't want to go to court, and being able to incorporate that into your safety plan and say, what other resources are there? The through line that I've experienced is relief. The fact that someone can just explain who they are, they can talk about aspects of their identity that have impacted them in unique ways when talking about domestic violence, and do that freely without fear of ridicule, without fear of being confronted or challenged about these things. I find that that's been a massive through line for the people that I've supported. Having the opportunity to elevate the voices of people whose stories otherwise don't get told.
So I think what is important also to understand is the vulnerability. Who is vulnerable and why? So we can understand why children, but also like people with disability. So imagine children with disability, how vulnerable they are. As a counsellor, it's always important to understand the context. So the social context, the economical, and cultural context, of course, because we know that nowadays with the economical context is really hard. It puts a hardship on families. That's also a factor where family violence can be enhanced, right? Multi-generational household may be complicated. The dynamics, right? And all the cultural expectations, loyalty, gender roles in a community, that is a lot of pressure, and caregiver can silence victims. All of these play a role. It's important to address systemic bias because of our young people, because of their age, having no family supporting them, they need that extra support, because they have a lot of stress and they have nobody to do things with them, and that can be harder for them to get help or to get results with systemic institutions, as we know. The culture and the norms that we are embedded in are not made for people who are not ticking the heteronormative box, and our violence can look differently for us because of our gender identity, and often we are not represented in marketing, like how violence can look like. We know for straight heteronormative norms, but it's not often talked about for our community and for young people when that's about family violence. I like to add that it's very important in this space to be intersectional. As a facilitator for the Queer Migrant Project, young migrant survivor of the FSV did share with us that often in services they had to cosplay because they were not seeing themselves, like service don't see themselves as a whole, but as one identity only, some are to pretend to be straight looking, some, and that's very traumatic. As victim of trauma, this is a non-linear narrative. So, we're gonna be in and out of the trauma. We can't always talk about trauma, but I think it's important to acknowledge that this trauma memory is not always chronological. So slowly we put the pieces together. Slowly we paint the whole picture so they can have a bit more acceptance and compassion for themselves. And slowly we talk about how then we can then build a new narrative, right? Build a new narrative for themselves. Also, there is really a hard time for young people when they feel really ambivalent about their relationship with their parents. We see, it's really hard. They feel torn because they love their parents, and we have to accept and acknowledge that it's normal to love your parents, even though your parents can be the perpetrator of violence, and that's the hard part, right? How can you grow and separate yourself? Because at some point they feel that when they're ready, and only, of course, that's really step by step. We are led by our young people, and whenever they're ready, but they know at some point they're gonna have to leave this violence. And what does it mean then? That's losing also people that they're supposing to love. And it's really the hard part when the family members are the abuser. What we talk also in session, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, is their internalized beliefs that don't belong to them. Because when you grow up with transphobic parents, when you grow up with people that believe into yourself that are not yours, because it plays a role against yourself. So there's also this inner fight that we talk about. How can we shift from your internalized transphobic belief or internalized any internalized beliefs that are against it? And I think that's not just, that's for every young person, in a sense that when you become your own adult. And I always say to young people, when you grow up, it's hard, but you're gonna become your own parent. So how can you become this parent that you always wanted to have, that you didn't get to start with? And I think that's how we start the work and the self-love part of things. It is a forever journey to accept parts of ourselves that don't look like everyone else. There are a lot of queer people have disabilities, and it's a gift. So we're trying to look at it as a gift, but of course they're gonna see that as a deficit. Because I'm not like everyone else. I can't go to loud spaces, I can't this, I can't that. But also we're trying to then see who they are instead of what they're not. So I think the normality, I want to have a normal life, I want to have a normal family, the comparison always is also play a role, in this space. And I think lastly, the big thing, and I'm gonna, so it's about relationship, it's about connection, it's about understanding. When you're a victim of family violence or intimate partner violence, I think it's also rebuilding what is a healthy relationship, rebuilding that narrative and understanding, maybe start with ourselves, what's our relationship with ourselves, but also as any young person, they want to connect, they want to have friends, they want to have lovers, they want to explore, and it's fair. But so they really always ask me to work on, a lot of young people ask me to work on, how can I know when it's a healthy relationship? How can I be a friend with my disability? There's a lot of barrier with that. So we talk a lot about this because they often feel isolated. Because we all need sometime an external help, who can be a neutral person, who can be somebody that don't know nothing about the family or is not connected, and that's where the work starts. And when you can reach out and be brave and courageous to do that, I know it takes a lot of effort, and it's important to acknowledge that. But I think like anyone that wants to reach out, they're already winning.
So it's important that we don't replicate like relationships where no choice is available to a person. So it's important that we don't replicate that in our service provision and how we work with people. Yeah.
You know, I have people who I work with where they haven't been able to choose the brand of milk they buy. They haven't had any choice in their relationship for a long time. And so when they begin to seek support, obviously choice and trusting people is quite a significant thing to do. And to then be having to choose what parts of them they show to somebody that they're seeking support from, having to figure out if it's another safe person or another person that they're going to have to hide certain parts of themselves for. Having someone that they know at least affirms a segment of their identity that they might be safe with makes a huge difference. Of being able to say, I identify as, we have polyamorous clients, we have clients who have identities that might not be known in mainstream orgs. But not having to explain who you are sometimes makes such a huge difference.
Or that when they do explain, it is their choice and not hopefully feel fear of being scrutinized or having that identity used against them. I think for me, journeying with them is really important, to have that balance that, I am in this role, like this is my job, so there's always going to be a certain dynamic or separation there. But because we are in certain communities together, or we have shared cultures or experiences in other regards, there is some level of pureness that isn't about balancing it out, but it's to hopefully make them feel invited in this space, that we can travel together, because maybe at some point in their journey they decide they want something else, or they decide they are somebody else, and they don't have to explain it all over for fear of losing my support as a worker.
Yeah, like you said, talking to someone who's a part of the community and having that shared understanding, that just saves a lot of stress and a lot of grief in trying to engage with people and seek support. I think it's just important to have someone who has an understanding of, at least a shared understanding of what it's like to be a part of the community. And that's what I think it's important. As I said, the peer-led support is important.
I just love that the people I work with get to work with someone who gets to show up as themselves at work. I don't have to hide who I am. I know that I'm backed by my workplace, and I think that means that the way I show up for clients is very different to how I would show up in a mainstream organization. Something that I feel very strongly about, that I tell people, is that they have a right to a service that affirms them. So when you're seeking support from a queer or trans organization, you have a right for not only your identity within the LGBTIQASB plus community to be affirmed, but also any other position that you have, any other cultures you belong to. And in the same way you have a right to be safe in a mainstream organization as well. You shouldn't necessarily need to seek support from a peer-led organization.
Important to have that option as well.
I think we find ourselves having sort of similar conversations with our clients every time that the bad things that happen to our clients who are persons using violence, maybe should not happen to them. Structural violence, systemic violence, or their own experiences with violence in any way in their personal lives should not have happened to them. They also deserved safety and comfort and a good life. But in that regard, they have a right to be safe to the people around them as well. As much as they want care and love and equality for their own selves, so do the people around them deserve it.
Mm-hmm. I think also about the important that we stress that we're not interested in demonizing them in ways that they would have already been demonized as a queer person by external structures. So we have no interest in replicating that either. Yeah.
Or to excuse them.
Yes, exactly.
Just because we all understand what it's like to be marginalized or disenfranchised in some ways doesn't mean we get to and what's the word? Impose that power or control over somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That we all, and our clients and people using violence, have the capacity for change.
They really do. I mean, we already experience so much violence externally outside of our community, and so I think it's important that we don't start using level of violence against each other. And I think, we owe it to our community to not be replicating that violence between each other. Yeah.
I do really mean it when I said journeying together, because as much as we are trying to invite them into the space to change their behavior, we are changing and learning from them as well. And it's hopeful for us as workers as well when people come into the space and do the work and teach us that we need to be doing the work as well.